You already know what the video is about. Let's talk about it. First things first, the frequency oscillations which I pointed out in my last video on firmware 221 is patched. Compared to the last result, frequency oscillations or ringing are almost non-existent whether using a heavy or light rim. The overall behavior at maximum velocity is now much more tamed. I also pointed out that this bass feels a bit sluggish with heavier rim. Patched. When using the lighter rim, the peak velocity is 34.125 radians per second or 1955.4 degrees per second or 326 RPM. With heavier rim, the peak velocity is 31.595 radians per second or 1810.8 degrees per second or 301.8 RPM. This slight reduction in peak velocity is basic physics and nothing to worry about. Compared to firmware 221, twitchiness has been fixed. Staying consistent on 221 was quite hard. 223 solved it. I'm able to get consistent lap times. Accidents are fairly less and a lot of stuff is repeatable and predictable. The overall feel is more raw and now it feels much closer to what I experienced in beta firmwares. Job well done, Simagic. Now before we move on to the comparison, let me quickly talk about something which I have been sitting on for at least a year and a half. Let's say I have a wheelbase XYZ with which I will break a lap record. I get happy for a couple of days until I take out the Alpha U and it absolutely decimates the old record. I could never truly understand why, which is why I stayed quiet because I could not prove it. But today I have some proof. Kind of. Majority of the times, the graph plotted out of the step test looks somewhat like this. This part is the deviation and this part is the behavior which gets repeated throughout 10 runs. And this is considered normal as 10 different runs can't be similar. Here's Alpha U's step test with a heavy rim, for example. You can see the deviations here and the common repeated behavior here. Pretty normal. But when I tested it with a lighter rim, that is the circular rim and a Pocconi Engineering Rally Hub, I got this. Notice something different. This is the behavior across 10 runs and it is more or less a line. All 10 runs performed nearly identically with minimal errors. This is something which should not have happened but did. The first time it happened, I thought it was just an anomaly, but upon retesting, it gave more or less the same result. See, this was the first test. This is the second. Twice in a row was no coincidence. I talked to one of my server members, CHSN, and together we tried to figure out what was actually happening. I did the tests multiple times and 40 to 50% of the time the result was like this. Rest of the times it looked like this. And this behavior was only taking place with a lighter rim, not with a heavy rim. When I shared these results on Discord, CHSN suggested that I should reduce the weight of the rim even further, which is basically mounting the rim to the base. So I did exactly that and ran the tests again. Out of 11 test runs, 5 times I got these almost perfect results. After a lot of testing and discussion, we concluded that the 23 Nm motor and the light rim achieves a temporary, almost perfect state, 40 to 50% of the time, which rules out the idea that the results were anomalies. They were repeatable. And in that state, everything aligned as closely as possible. The bass showed remarkable accuracy when it came to responding to those step commands. As if like the motor was controlling the light rim like a weightless feather. Now it could be the reason why Alpha U always manages to obliterate the record set by other wheelbases, but I can't say that for sure until I get an oscilloscope. But based on my limited testing and personal experience, there is something different about this wheelbase. It is the only one to exhibit this behavior out of all the bases I have. But like I said, once the oscilloscope lands, this behavior will be further studied. For now, let's move on to the comparison. And here's the thing. I don't think these two bases should be compared. I'll give you 2 reasons. First, Evo Pro is not here to replace Alpha U. And second, novelty and recency bias. People naturally give more weight to whatever's newest in their memory. A product that has just launched feels more relevant or exciting, so the older one starts to seem a bit stale in comparison, even if the performance hasn't changed. That said, the Evo Pro is still an improvement. The question is, by how much? I'm not a top split alien, but I do sit quite high on AMS2's Bathurst leaderboard. My previous best was 2 minute 4:4:16. With the Evo Pro, I simply could not beat it. It's quite hard to explain why, but it felt like I was already extracting the maximum performance out of the bass. Swapping to the Alpha U, I dropped nearly 0.4 of a second. Same car, same track, same everything. Alpha U let me extract more repeatable performance. In case you're curious, here are the settings I used for each bass. Of course, lap record isn't a definitive measure of Evo Pro's performance. I'm sure someone else can do well with it, but I can only speak for myself. Alpha U gave me an edge that Evo Pro was unable to. Moving on to Lemma Ultimate, I could not find a big enough gap between both basses. Both performed well, and the only thing setting them apart was Evo Pro's lighter rotor being obviously responsive. Not saying Alpha U wasn't as responsive, but there's a distinct difference between a heavy and a lighter rotor. Rally between both was more or less the same experience, so nothing particularly interesting to talk about there. But here is something you did not expect. Truck sims. For truck sim, Alpha U ate and left no crumbs. It has a bigger, beefier motor with a comparatively heavier rotor, which results in a naturally higher rotational inertia, making it possible for the wheel to be incredibly slow and flowy. Since truck sims require gentle, slow and calculated movements in the wheel, responsiveness has very little role to play here. You want control and a very fine balance of friction and inertia, as the trucks are huge and making sudden steering changes are generally not recommended. The steering can be configured from very sticky all the way to smooth and eager to return to center. Of course, in-game settings play a role as well, but the Alpha U feels more natural. Evo Pro's lighter shaft is at a slight disadvantage here. Adding artificial friction and inertia might not feel good enough to some, and to top it all off, the wheel's weight makes it tilt in either direction. It doesn't stay in the center. Alpha U's motor does not do this. All of this aside, there still cannot be a black and white answer. Answering which is a better bass is like declaring a random person's favorite color or ice cream. It's chocolate, by the way. To me, Alpha U remains a stellar wheelbase. It can do 90 to 95% of what Evo Pro does. My initial statement from Evo Pro's review still stands. This is a good wheelbase, but based on force feedback alone, not worth the upgrade in my opinion. When you factor in other aspects such as the pass-through, the additional ports, the price, it starts to look more like an upgrade. But here's the thing, I'm not disregarding what Evo Pro brings to the table, but I also won't disregard what Simagic achieved with the Alpha U. To me, a flagship isn't defined by specs, but by its reliability, its software support, its consistency. Because at the end of the day, that is what you paid for. That's been it. I've been the Napman, and may the downforce be with you.